let's dive into like you basically being a startup founder, and then also like keeping it to like thinking of like humans in general in the future, like the 99th percentile, and building a playbook for scientists to do them to do it themselves, to become operators and startup founders themselves, because then that's almost like I just see like an infinity, a decision trees of going. And that's kind of what I was trying to get into, is like an incubator or something, is that you're just starting it. And then it's like, well, then that person can go down and down and down. And you have all these companies that are eventually moving the needle.
Yeah, so I think maybe it would be helpful to give some context on how most biotech companies are started right now. It's kind of like a tech before, not an expert in tech history, but from what I understand, like before Zuck and these kind of other companies came out, insofar that there's not a cult of like the young founder or the founder in general in biotech. It's actually often these companies are incubated by VC funds that are basically like McKinsey-esque structurally. Sure. So they have like all these grad students and postdocs that they pay like ideate ideas, and like the ideas are like moved up and up across like partners of different levels. And then like some of the partners go and like start the company, and they hire in a CEO, and then they all are like friends with the pharma companies, right? So then they go and like sell it to their pharma friend if like it works, or they don't if it doesn't. And to be clear, like they're really good at what they do. They've built a number of amazing companies this way. But there isn't really a like pattern or a playbook, or even honestly, like there's a lot of people who are like trying to become this. I don't think anybody's like the de facto winner yet. Like a fund or like thesis of the idea of founder-led biotech. And the reason why that's so important, and to be clear, they're not mutually exclusive. The reason why it's so important is because it's rate limiting. If you can only have a certain like very small section of the population be qualified to go and build biotech companies and go and build new drugs, then you're just not going to have that many drugs, right? And this is like every drug that is like you refused, like almost certainly has come either like internally at a pharma, or like via like an acquisition from a biotech, right? So like one company like getting founded or not founded, or failing when it shouldn't have failed, or not getting funded because they couldn't raise money because the CEO was like 25 or whatever, like you have potentially lost a drug and therefore like damned a certain portion of people to a worse life. So this is like the one frustration that I really, really have with the traditional bio and pharma industry, is they're so closed off and they're so hierarchical, and they're so, I think it's the narrative internally is like, well, this is really difficult. This is very serious business, like this is regulatory, right? This is patients' lives. But I think in like this desire to be closed off and be bearish and cold and exclusive, we've actually limited the number of people and a number of like companies and a number of like, shots on goal that we have. And that's to be amazing. Clear, like you need to have the expertise in-house. Like the people who lead the various aspects of Loyal are much more experienced than I am. I don't lead the science, but I catalyze it. And we need more catalysis moments in interesting bio areas. So that's why it's important to me, because the other aspect of this is that traditional scientific training really is like the opposite of what you need to be trained and how you need to think if you want to build a company. Unless you basically have gone to like Stanford or Harvard, like they'll give you some like, but even then, like it's really, it's like it teaches you to like not value time in some ways. Like spending 7 years on a PhD is something like any founder would just go like psycho about, right? You're like optimizing for saving money because you're it's underfunded. You're following the hierarchy. You're buying into the fact that you even need a PhD to do anything. And of course, like you need to have the competency, and we have a lot, like many PhDs, and like I'm glad they have it. But if you want to be a founder, it often can be contrary to kind of the antagonistic mindset you need to have to be able to do the thing. So I learned it from Laura. But if I hadn't had Laura, I wouldn't have figured any of this out. And so many of them don't. And then it's just like pain for years. And like often the companies like can't raise money and they just die, even though they're good ideas.
Well, so one of the things though, in terms of science and then communication of that science, I think that's one of the throughways that has been, I guess, lacking in the last couple of years. There's so much great science, so much great research, technology, and then the science communication is maybe lacking in some ways. How are you kind of going about that problem or a challenge?
Yeah. So, I mean, one of my goals in there also is like make biotech sexy again.
Yeah, exactly.
So my goal is to eventually like, could you have updates, loyal updates or whatever that are as well attended and as, aesthetic as like an Apple product announcement, right? No, it's hard because a lot of it's data, a lot of it's caveated, things like that. Drugs are not pretty, they're not as cool as rockets going up and like exploding or not exploding. You really don't want the explosion ever, because that's usually will have impacted a living creature if it did. So it's a little bit different, but I think that's one aspect of science communication. So just like getting people excited about the idea.
Totally.
I think it's also writing about it. So I try to be like verbal about the fact that I'm building an agent, and it's you really have to be careful, right? Because one thing we're working on is like really finding the balance, like how are you consumery but also accessible, but also scientifically legit, and communicate that you're legit but also don't violate confidentiality. And we haven't found the right balance yet. But I think a lot of it is, it's not about necessarily teaching people something, although that's helpful too. I think it's more about catalyzing the interest. And then the last thing I'll say on this is I think the aging field has had like explicitly bad narratives, like hilariously bad narratives that have been driven by like charlatans in the field. Because it's almost like religious in many ways, right? Like people are so terrified of death that they just look for somebody, and like there's always these people who come up and like say these like generalist things that are completely untrue. Like, what would you do if you like could continue to live another 20 years? And like, what if you do if you live 1,000? And it's honestly, I think, unethical, like a lot of the narratives that are peddled in aging right now. But it also scares competent people away from the field, because you look at it and you're like, well, like if you know anything, you can tell this person's an idiot because I think they're tweeting or whatever is like clearly not factual. And then you assume the rest of the field is this way because the person's like a leader in the field. And like expert. I had this. Right. Like I was skeptical in the field for years. Like I was interested in the thesis, but I was not interested at all in getting involved in the aging and longevity field because I thought it was a bunch of psychos yelling about 1,000-year lifespans. But it's not actually what it is.
And then hoarding wealth and blood, all this other stuff. That comes with it. Yeah.
And so you really like, I think, dogs are great because it's not controversial. Like our drugs aren't going to be insanely expensive, right? It's all cash pay. Nobody thinks society's going to fall apart because our dogs are living longer, healthier lives. And
it'll just a net positive for everyone around.
All the way.